One afternoon, it was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room, except there are only 3 people in the building and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a coworker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the door, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later, and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office, and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office. She scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also, but last I heard they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He awoke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except the church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1, whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel vs a human and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2, it was easily running somewhere around 40-50 mph in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself is 45 mph limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3, the final thing. Its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reactions the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do like right on the border of the Cascade mountain range, and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad," I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, he had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do, before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond," repeated in my head, but the silence continued. Now at this point I'm freaking out and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there, but what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well. She also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time as was still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. This isn't a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was a little kid, so I've only heard this story from my grandma, who likes to tell me things like these when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her 3 younger siblings. One of them was a baby and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling 3 hyper kids and 1 baby on an airplane isn't that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the 2 youngest while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on my mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forget it all. Just as my grandma's about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder, and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she'd like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays I don't think people will be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly reads, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sisters coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she'd ever had since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she's really excited to introduce this man she befriended on the flight to my grandpa and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details, and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows. 10 minutes went by. Then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma, worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all the people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response. "Sorry, ma'am, there's no man's name on this list." To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. So my aunt married a man from a relatively well-off English family who had purchased part of a large mansion house near Myler, Cornwall, rural coastal area in the south of England. As a result, when I was younger, we were occasionally invited down to spend a few nights there in the summer. It's a pretty idealistic location, with the house built on the side of a hill facing directly to the sea. As I'll explain, the house used to be a guest house and has always been described as haunted by members of the local community. At the time of my experience, however, I didn't know the real reason why it was considered haunted, and I only found that out later. During renovations, for example, the builders had claimed to have seen the ghost of a woman in an old-fashioned dress walking down the stairs. Nevertheless, I'd never experienced anything until this happened. One summer, I brought my now ex-girlfriend to the house with me, and we stayed in a bedroom on the ground floor. It wasn't an in-suit, so to go to the loo you would have to leave the room and walk across the hallway to the toilet across the way. In the middle of the night, my GF at the time wakes me to say that she's going to the loo and she'll be back in a moment. I sit up groggy-eyed in the darkness, say okay, and then lie down to go back to bed. She doesn't turn the lights on, but in the darkness I can make out her opening the door, leaving the room and closing the door behind her. I lie down, close my eyes, and about a minute later hear the door open again, and someone walk into the room. Assuming it to be my girlfriend, I don't open my eyes, but shift to make room for her to get into bed. I hear her walk over to the bed and get in, and I reach over to embrace and feel what feels like the body of a woman. My eyes are still shut at this point. Suddenly I hear a woman's voice from across from me, not my GFS, asking me, "Are you going to come tomorrow?" Realizing it's not my GF, I open my eyes in shock, and at that very moment my girlfriend opens the door to the room. I look across and realize there is no one in bed with me at all. I bolt up and my GF has to spend the next hour calming me down while I explain what happened. The next day I tell my uncle about this and ask about why the house is considered as haunted. He laughs, saying I probably encountered a ghost of the people who used to stay in the guest house. I ask for an explanation, and he says that during the 1900s there was a terrible boating accident in this part of Cornwall, and a boat, the MV Darlwine, totally disappeared with something like 30-odd passengers. A large number of the, presumably dead, passengers were staying at the guest house, hence why locals all presume the place to be haunted. Having heard this, I could only explain it as the ghost of one of the passengers, who was presumably asking me whether I was gonna come on their ill-fated boat trick the next day. Safe to say, I avoided boats for the rest of that trip. I don't really believe in the paranormal. In fact, I don't really believe it at all, but I do have a few stories that stick with me that are unexplainable to my brain even years later with a more adult and reasonable thought process. The first that comes to mind is one I always tell my friends that gives me chills and freaks me out and will always make me feel some type of way for the foreseeable future. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time, and my dad was in the military. We were stationed in Fort Knox and lived on base in a provided military apartment. I moved around a lot growing up and have plenty of superstitious family members, so at the time of being a child, the fear of the supernatural always existed. I lived pretty normally, and then I made a friend named Dylan. Hope he is doing well these days. One day, after school, his mom invited me over to their home. They also lived on base. Right away, entering that apartment, I felt very uneasy or like someone was watching me. However, as the day went by, I played with him and his little sister and things were normal. Nothing amiss, and so on his birthday, I returned to his home for the final time. When I came through the door again, I got that uneasy feeling. This time I asked him about it, and his demeanor changed as well as his little sister's. He didn't really want to talk about it. Being young, I found that to be a bit strange. As his birthday went on, I found myself needing to use the bathroom. There were 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went to enter the bathroom downstairs, and without a mist breath him and his sister both say, "We don't use that bathroom. Don't go in there. I didn't really think much of it until he asked if I would stand outside the door of the upstairs bathroom while he used it. Things now seemed off, and that uneasy feeling sank in. I complied. We went upstairs. He went to pee and left the door wide open and asked me not to let anyone shut it, which freaked me out because it was just me and him upstairs. I was dying to piss and asked if he would stand outside because now I was nervous, to which he refused. Angry that he didn't return the favor, I stormed off downstairs, yanked the bathroom door open, and meant to take a piss. Kind of funny, and it gets a little funnier and terrifying. At 10 years old, pants halfway down, I am about ready to piss when the lights go off. The switch is inside as well as the lock, which frightens me because now I can't see and I have my pants down. Then it flicks back on and then off again, and then it begins happening a lot more rapidly. What gives me chills is that to this day I distinctly remember seeing the light switch flip itself up and down on its own. This picks up. Now a terrified 9 or 10-year-old, I begin to panic and try to open the door. I got the door open at about a head's width and it slammed on me really hard. Lights are still flickering. I open it again and go to step out and it slams on me even harder. Now crying for his mom or anyone because the lights are flickering and the door is slamming on me. His mom hears me plea and is yanking on the door, to which I am pushing. Finally, the door flung open and both her and I went falling forward at the force. I cried and went home. It really ruined me being friends with Dylan and we never talked about it. I remember later my mom asked if I remembered that story and told me his mother called and apologized. She also proceeded to tell my mom further that her and her husband had been experiencing a lot of things in the apartment. One being that she would wake up in the night to something raising the covers off of her husband and whispering his name. I don't believe in ghosts, but that is one of the most terrifying and unexplainable portions of my childhood, and experience unlike any other. Not my story, but one of my law professors. The professor taught torts and insurance law. In insurance, there's this idea of an insurance interest, or means that in order to take out a policy on someone / something, you have to have some kind of connection to them / it. That means you want them / it safe. Life insurance. Need to have some kind of relation to the person that makes them more valuable to you alive than dead, is the short version. Parent, child, employer. The specifics are outlined in your country / state's insurance code. Importantly, uncle is not on that list by default. Deadbeat and his wife are looking for some easy money. Deadbeat and wife live together with his mom, brother, and nephew. Nephew loves to play baseball. Wife has an idea. Great idea. She hates her in-laws, and Deadbeat doesn't have a single cell rattling around his skull, apparently. So Deadbeat goes to the local insurance agent, friend of the family, takes out a life insurance policy on nephew, payable to Deadbeat. Insurance agent signs off on it because he knows the family. Deadbeat and wife pack up all their stuff from the house and put it in their cars. They wait until brother goes to work. Time to get to work. Deadbeat goes to his sleeping nephew and stabs him to death. Wife stabs grandma to death in her chair. They douse the place in gasoline and light up the house. Investigators put it all together pretty easily, considering Deadbeat and wife still have all their stuff conveniently packed up in their cars. Those two idiots are still in jail as far as I know. My professor gets involved in the story because brother is suing the insurance company for writing the policy that got his son killed. Insurance company says to him, well, the contract says it pays out X, so we'll pay you X. Professor is on the phone and says, friend, we aren't suing you under the contract. We are suing in negligence. We would like all of your money. Negotiations were short, meaning they take months instead of years. Professor is taking a stroll one evening, talking to the insurance company's lawyer on the phone. Conversation ends, he hangs up. Baseball falls out of a tree next to him. Nephew loved baseball. It's the anniversary of nephew's death. Some things are just too creepy to make up. Ghosts have always gravitated towards me. I used to live in an apartment that was redone because of a fire and someone died because of it. I had no clue that the apartment I lived in had the death. I happened to choose the room where the woman passed. The whole time I lived there I'd get shaken awake at 7:30 every weekday morning. I'd look and see no one, go back to sleep and immediately get shaken again. Look, and again see no one, try to sleep again, get shaken even harder, and get up and go to the couch. At 8:00 a.m. I'd get shaken again, go back to my bed to go back to sleep. I worked nights as a dishwasher, so 7:30 and 8 was too early for me. When my girlfriend moved in with me, that's when I realized it was a woman who died in my room when the fire happened. Because after my girlfriend moved in, I'd still get shaken awake every weekday morning at 7:30 and 8:00, but my girlfriend wouldn't. Women get changed together all the time, so having my girlfriend in the room was fine to this ghost, but not me. And 30 minutes is just enough time for a woman to get ready for work after her shower. We figured she liked us because we'd start to hear a disembodied laugh every now and then. Not a bad laugh, a genuine, that's funny laugh. It spooked everyone who heard it at first, but we got used to it after a while. Then one day my girlfriend invited my ex-girlfriend over. No biggie, they were friends. My ex and I agreed after a troubled relationship that we're better friends. That female ghost hated my ex. The room would get cold whenever my ex came by and she'd hear angered growls. Just my ex. One night when they were getting ready to head out to the bar, my ex took a shower at the apartment because it was better than hers. She comes out of the bathroom white as a ghost and scared. "Didn't you hear me yell?" she asked us. "I thought you guys were fucking with the light in the bathroom. It kept going on and off. I could hear the switch. Then the water goes ice cold and I could see the outline of a hand go past the shower head." "No, not a word came from the bathroom. I guess the ghost doesn't like you," said my girlfriend said. "You did not say anything about a ghost here." My ex said sternly, "How can you live like this?" "Oh, she loves us. We make her laugh," I said. "Really, all I hear are growls when I'm here. Explains why it gets cold when you come by." My girlfriend said, "I thought you had no heat." "Heat bills paid. It only happens when you're here," I said. "Fine, I won't come by anymore. She clearly hate me." My ex said she never went back to the apartment. After that it went back to normal. Every weekday I'd get shaken awake at 7:30 and 8:00. The disembodied laugh came back. Then a year later we moved out. I'm fairly certain the ghost came with us because my roommate who lived with us said it was too quiet, and the apartment door stopped opening and closing on its own at 8:00 on weekdays. I had no clue about the door to the hall until he said that.